The Faces Foundation is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, and it's an acronym. FACES is for Family and Caregiver Education and Support in the area of pulmonary illnesses and diseases of the lungs. It was started in memory of my late husband, Phil Lamka, in 2006, and it has been growing ever since. It was started by a group of friends, family, and loved ones who came up with the acronym and just really wanted to help do this. My husband died from complications of interstitial lung disease back in 2005, and I needed a way to deal with the grief and everything, just to deal with the whole process. And I told him just before he died, I said, I'm going to do a foundation. And he got a little smile on his face and he said, that's great. So, not knowing what I was going to do, I went ahead and kind of dove into it and found out how you do a foundation. And through the help of family and friends, forming the application and doing all of that, it started. And our mission is to acknowledge and promote professional excellence in the education and care of patients with life-threatening pulmonary illnesses. FACES reflects, acknowledges, and advocates for the many faces of those living with pulmonary illnesses, the patients, their support network of close family and friends, and those unsung heroes in the respiratory profession, the respiratory therapists, who understand that each breath matters. Our logo is a tree. And if you look close at the tree, you'll see among the branches the many faces of the FACES Foundation, the patients, the family members, the respiratory therapists, everyone that's involved in helping them breathe easy. My husband, Phil Lamka, died in 2005 from complications of an interstitial lung disease, nonspecific interstitial pneumonitis, NSIP. He was on a golfing trip with friends, had a terrible time breathing, came home, went to his doctor, ended up going to the hospital in an ambulance, and they thought it was congestive heart failure. But no, it wasn't. It was his lungs. It seems that he had a virus or something in his lungs, and it went away. But for some reason, his autoimmune system said, hey, buddy, you're still sick. And it went and started destroying his lungs. So that's where our journey began. And in the beginning, he was very courageous. I mean, he would go out and golf with friends and he'd have his little backpack of oxygen and they'd drive him up to this hole and he'd take a swing and get back in and away he went. But as the disease progressed, the walls of the lungs got thicker and the air couldn't get through. He couldn't breathe. And so at this point, there was nothing left to do except to have a lung transplant. And at that time, the list was different than it is now. It was who was on it the longest. They went through all the protocols to try to get him approved, but it just didn't work out. He passed before that could happen. So in the final weeks of his life, we looked at each other and I said, I got to do something. So knowing what we'd been through with this disease and not knowing in the beginning what a respiratory therapist was, I decided that I'm going to do a foundation, Phil, and he smiled and I said, it's for respiratory. I don't know what, but we're going to do it. And so I went ahead and just looking back, realized that we didn't know what a respiratory therapist was when we began. We thought, hey, they came in the room, they plugged his oxygen in. If he had a dry nose, maybe they put something in his cannula, and that was basically it. But through the whole process, we learned that they were so much more than that. When it got so difficult for him to breathe, they would turn his bed upside down so that the air could find ways to ease itself out so he could breathe. There's a clomping method on the chest used for cystic fibrosis children. They taught me how to do that to try to break up the congestion. In ICU, just near the end, obviously he needed total oxygen and the masks weren't comfortable. They just weren't working for him. So one of the RTs came in before her shift and she scoured the hospital for a thing that doesn't, I think, exist anymore, the BiPAP mask. BiPAP, I guess we called it the Jason mask from the horror stories. It fit his entire face and the air just came in, but it made him comfortable. And she did that. And then at the very end, when he took his last breath, it was the respiratory therapist who comforted me, held my hands, and was there for me at the end. So I knew how important it was, but we just don't understand what a respiratory therapist is. If they're with us from the day we're born to the day we die, and for all the breathing challenges in between. So that's how the FACES Foundation and our signature program, the Phil Award, came into being. The Phil Award, we wanted a way to recognize respiratory therapists, have others know what the respiratory therapist does, and also to give patients a voice. Let them tell their stories about how the respiratory therapist helps them. So the Phil Award stands for another acronym, Pulmonary Health and Illnesses of the Lungs. So the hospitals partner with us. It's the only national hospital-based recognition program that honors respiratory therapists as nominated by patients, family members, and other caregivers. So the hospitals partner with us, and then we give them all the tools they need, templates for nominating brochures, et cetera, implementation calls on how to get nominations. And then each hospital conducts their own program in terms of making their community aware of the fact that they can nominate a respiratory therapist. It also, they do their own presentations, they set up when to do them, et cetera, and they honor the best of the best. And that's what we're trying to do here. It helps the hospitals educate the community, their hospital community, because a lot of departments and administrators don't know what the respiratory therapist does. And it also helps the general public recognize what they're doing. And then the Phil Award is given to each honoree. It's a pewter sculpture that's on a marble base. This figure in the back represents the respiratory therapist. The butterfly with its wings open are the lungs. So you, the respiratory therapist, are giving us the ability to breathe, the ability to fly. And so we appreciate that so much. Every honoree that gets this award is getting a big thank you from anyone that they ever helped. And it's also a thank you to the entire team, because it takes a team to do this and to take care of each and every patient. So that's the Phil Award, and that's provided to every honoree, along with other a signed certificate. We have a little lapel pin with a butterfly where if someone asks, they can say, I'm a Phil Award honoree, and explain what it's all about. The Phil Award has just caught on. If we get in a state, we get more and more hospitals, because hospitals they get pressure from their administration. How come we didn't do this award? And the respiratory therapists get excited about it. It's not somebody, your supervisor, making judgments. It is the fact that it promotes patient advocacy. You're helping the patient and their family members. So I think the hospitals appreciate that. They appreciate the national recognition. They appreciate the help of recruiting the best of the best and retaining them and recognizing them. So that's so very important to them too. And it's a community, so they can communicate to each other. We have a hospital portal on our website where they can share stories. They go to, national conventions, local conferences. They know each other. It's all a group they all belong to. And the thing, and what I didn't say about the Phil Award, I had a respiratory therapist at a presentation I was doing at a hospital in Ohio. And she came up to me after the ceremony and said, you know what, I'm going to get that Emmy next year. So the Phil Award has now become the Emmy of the respiratory community. So that's an important thing. And it's a milestone in that regard, that people recognize how important it is to the respiratory therapists themselves, but to the hospital and to the patients and the family members. When we started, we were mainly in Michigan, and now we've grown to 31 states with over 111 hospitals, because we just picked up 2 in Florida yesterday, and it's constantly growing, and it's just very exciting. And the big milestone for me personally is that the grief has turned into me being a partner of a wonderful community that I did not know existed. And with COVID-19, a lot of other people now are realizing how essential the respiratory therapist is. You've got to have them on the front line. I mean, if you call team stat, if you don't have a respiratory therapist, you're out of luck. Just so many things. They help us breathe easy. So I can see when I do, if I've been in a hospital a few years from the first presentation to the third or fourth, I can see people, pulmonologists, heads of other departments coming to the presentation. So people are understanding the value of the respiratory therapist. I really, the Daisy Award for Nursing is in almost every hospital, and everyone knows what great work the nurses do. I would like respiratory to be recognized the same way. I would like instead of 31 states, let's do 50 states, and let's go beyond the 50 states and go, to Canada and anywhere else that there are practicing respiratory therapists worldwide. And I think also we are in fact in the process of developing some educational modules that we can have our fellow award honorees and their teams get continuing education credits. We're also looking at doing something for patients and family members that'll give them information or people they can contact regarding whether it's COPD or asthma or whatever it is that you're in need of and are having difficulty breathing. If you're in a hospital, hopefully visiting and not in, or not even visiting, but if you're around a hospital, ask someone what color the respiratory therapist is wearing, and then go up to them and say, thank you. They'll probably go, what are you thanking me for? And you can just say, if you remember, helping us breathe easy. We thank you so much for that. And things are moving forward with COVID. Maybe at some point you can give them a big hug because they've worked hard during COVID and they really need that. And faces need your help too. If you've had care in a hospital from an outstanding respiratory therapist or a team, contact us. But just breathe easy. It is so important. We don't realize that if you can't, you'd look at my husband when he was sitting in bed and you think, this is a healthy man. He'd try to brush his teeth, button his shirt. He'd get out of breath. Everything we do, we take it for granted. Every breath does matter. So take care of yourselves and remember to think of the respiratory therapist.